take them out.
Say that again.
Do we have all the old ones kind of mixed in with there that get confusing? I can take those ones out. We had like one or two.
We do have some old ones there.
Yeah. Well, so, yeah, look, you, me, and Maureen, we have a good time.
Yeah. Maybe the boys will show.
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Well, I didn't make the setup any easier, but at least I finally think I fixed the sound problems, because last week was really bad. I listened to it afterwards. I'm amazed that anybody watched it.
A couple of times, you know, he still has this condition.
Yeah, no, I know. I know.
He's uncomfortable.
Now, with that kind of stuff, right? What are you supposed to do? I mean, you know, how can you can't sit? You know, you can't drive. You can't do anything.
No, it isn't that. It's something beside that. It's an immune system. I don't know.
Got it. Okay. Well. All right.
So someone gave Morty this big policy. And he said, "Can I cut it down?" I said, "Well, you have the census, you can't really."
Well, the thing about the census is the thing that matters, right? That's really the only thing that actually matters on a talus. So, and you have to actually periodically replace them anyway. So they're meant to come off and come back on again. I had to ask Jonah for help because I actually have no idea how to tie them myself. And like you can see right here, these ones actually are getting loose. So I have to get new ones. But basically, the material itself, I think the general idea is that you're trying to avoid, you know, the shatnez or any of the other prohibitions about material, right? But it can be wool, it can be cotton. People make it out of silk, I think.
You know, I had a silk one that wore out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. This one, again, this is my bar mitzvah talus, which I've, you know, used basically, I don't know. I can't even count how many times at this point. And other than the fact that it could use a dry cleaning, you know, it's still holding up really well.
Inside, I had a dry cleaner, Jewish fellow. And he would do.
See, that's the thing. When you take a. Oh, free of charge? Oh, that was nice. When you take a talus to a dry cleaner these days, it's always funny to see how they put it into the system, right? Because no dry cleaner, unless you're working in Borough Park, has a button that says talus.
Right.
So, and they just push shirt, pants, whatever. So it tends to be, what do they call it? A table runner. You know, because that's really, if you think about it, what else does it actually look like? You know, it's sort of funny.
Good Shabbos!
Good Shabbos to you. Good Shabbos to you, and our door is open. That's, you know. Oh, now I feel like a tikkun's made. Good morning to you both. Oh, good.
All right, so
good.
You're going to do a half a million.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
You know, I didn't bring my mouse. But
You don't need it.
Yeah, no, but wherever you are comfortable, we generally go, right, on Saturday mornings, we generally don't get above 5 or 6 people.
Oh.
And, you know, we keep the door open a little bit of ventilation. So long as you're comfortable, that's the main idea. Anybody who wants to put a mask on, put on a mask. Look, obviously, you know, you have to deal with me. I can't.
Thank you.
No, but you won't. That's the thing, is even in a small room like this, if somebody, right, exactly. But like last week, we had it was really sort of funny. We had an unintentional mechitza.
Last week we almost had a minion.
Yeah, no, it was really. Are you sure you want to sit there? Because you might get cold with the wind, you can sit over here. Wherever you. Okay, you can move around wherever you want. You know, no restrictions here. No restrictions here.
No.
I think what happened was that early on in COVID, right, we took the telesim and put them away because at that point people were concerned about, you know, transmission through touch. But now that I think about it, we probably.
By the way, if we have to get into the shul.
We can now?
I spoke with Tom.
So does it involve a ladder?
I'll put a ladder down. Well,
do we have workers' comp? I mean, you know.
The first floor, the subfloor is already done.
Yeah.
Back up. We've already got metal for the next floor.
After Shabbos, we'll send you some pictures. It's phenomenal. And we really ended up with the right builders. They're doing a.
You know, there's a screening of it. You can look right in. Of course, during the week, I go into the workers.
Well, Tom is a wonderful person. He's a really wonderful guy. Our project manager there. Foreman, right?
People are phenomenal. We speak to them every week or so.
Good Shabbos.
engineer,
Okay.
the architect, the committee. So we're
It's going well.
Really
yes. We're hoping before cool bad weather to be enclosed.
Well, they want to finish the
They
concrete
want-
work.
One thing.
Concrete work before.
Yeah.
The
Well,
winter.
today they can concrete even in freezing. They use alcohol. Not that we want it.
No, I don't think it's a good idea. It's antifreeze.
You're right.
It's not a good
You
idea.
want to get in? Oh, okay. So, Morty will be here also.
And what do you
Before
think?
we, I hope so.
I saw it. It's a pity to see you.
Terrible, but.
And Morty used to come here. You all used to come here.
Absolutely.
With Jan.
With Jan, right? I used to come here. I mean, that's the funniest
That's
part.
when I met Leon.
Right. Because during the off season, right? Right. Right.
I didn't know he was along when he came here.
He's very unassuming that way,
And
right?
I danced with him and I said to him, you danced with him.
You should be a rabbi. I love it.
We would sometimes in the winter,
Yeah.
we would struggle to get a.
Yeah, no, it made sense, right? Yeah, it made sense.
Sometimes Leon and I, or one or two would come here, and sometimes they would come to
Well,
shul.
in those days, Sag Harbor, Adas Israel,
Right.
I went there once when we came, and they were laying in Torah from Friday night.
Right, that way when Steinberg was here, that would have been probably normal.
No,
it was before Leon,
The
right?
reason they laid Torah Friday night.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm quite
Way
surprised.
back.
No, what? 20 years ago. we
Right.
came.
it's because,
And
you
the
know,
reason they didn't have a minyan on Shabbos.
right.
So,
So that's interesting. So that's an old thing, though, for Reform. The reason why they did it primarily at the beginning was much like, right, your dad probably had to work on Shabbos, yes?
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of people in the end, right, they owned a store, they had to be open on Saturday, so they weren't in shul at all. And so the logic was better that they hear Torah at an off time than to hear no Torah at all. Because if you think about it, it's true, right? Otherwise, the average person, their only interaction with Torah is that they come to shul and they hear it read, right? Going back to the very beginning.
Right.
So if you're not in the room, there's not a whole lot that you can do. But anyway.
Those days, my famous quote, Paul Steinberg, who was the dean of
Of HUC.
HUC. I
Yeah.
used to say, Paul, this is Jewish. The rabbi.
No, I don't. Neil still wants me to do the benediction at the end of the service. He describes it in great detail where Neil Steinberg would get up there and.
Saperstein, one of the
Oh no, for sure. Sapersteins, Davidson, like all the guys that were trained in.
I gave you take a phone. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. How many I put out?
Yeah, that's good.
well, optimism is a good thing.
It is a good thing. It's in short measure these days, man. Good things for sure.
Would you believe?
Parsha is a good parsha.
Oh, it is.
Yes. Would you
It
believe
is.
this is a camera? This is a camera.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. So there are for the handful of people who show up early for our service on.
They're not hearing what we're talking about.
They won't hear what you're talking about, likely because the microphone is the thing next to it that's pointed towards me.
No.
But I don't think that you'd have to worry about
Is
anything.
it on yet?
Yes.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. What are you worried about? Do we have some big serious conversation? No. No, but again,
Knowing me,
all right. So next time I'll warn you. Generally speaking, by 9:30 it's on. Just otherwise, I get a text from my father asking. Last week he got very concerned because I guess I forgot to tell him that services start at 9:30 instead of 10. So he turns it on at 10 o'clock, and we're already at the Mita. And he's like, "What happened here?"
Your father listens to you?
Oh, my father listens to me. Not only does he listen to me, he sends me feedback, and sometimes in the middle of the service. So like last night he texted me because I keep my phone there just to make sure that the system is working. But he first he tells me that the piano is too loud, so I have, which is funny. But then he told me that my kippah looked funny, and so then all of a sudden I realized I was going like this and adjusting in real time, and I thought, boy, what a thing! I wonder if Rashi, when he was davening, his dad was sitting there in the last row telling him, what he needed to fix. But then he gets self-conscious when I mention it, So anyway, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom to those on the camera. Shabbat Shalom. Shalom. No, I know it's both good and bad, right? This is,
So we'll help along. So
oh, of course, I expect it. That's a very important part of the equation. And as I said, right, you get cold, just move around wherever you need to be. All right, so let's warm up a little. Yallai la 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 yallai 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 la 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 yallai la 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 yallai yallai la la yallai la 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 yallai la la yallai Again, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll begin our service on page 186 and 186, very top of the page. Modehani lechanecha melech chai v'kayam. Modehani lechanecha melech chai v'kayam. Modehani lechanecha Modehani lefanecha Melechai v'kayam shechazarta bi nishmati b'chemla rabba emunatecha. We'll turn now to page 192 at the very top of the page. Mahatohu oahalecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael. Mahatohu oahalecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael. Turn now to page 194. We'll read together in Hebrew at the top of the page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yatzar et ha'adam b'chokhmah, u'bara vo nekavim nekavim, chalulim chalulim. Galui v'yadua lifnei chisech kavodecha, she'im yipateach echad mehem, o yisatem echad mehem, yefshar litkayem v'la'amod lefanecha. Baruch atah Adonai rofeh chol basar, mafli la'asot. It's the doctor's prayer. It's good. It's so important. And it's one of those prayers, though, that you only appreciate more and more as you get older. It's one of those things you certainly understand. It's really quite remarkable. Body is a remarkable thing. Page 196. So is the soul. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorai. 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 My God, the soul you have given me is pure. You created it, you shaped it, you breathed it into me, and you protect it within me. For as long as my soul is within me, I offer thanks to you, Adonai, my God and God of my ancestors, source of all creation, sovereign of all souls. Praised are you, Adonai, in whose hand is every living soul and the breath of humankind. Baruch atah Adonai, asher bi'ado nefesh kol chai ve'ruach kol b'sar ish. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 198, Nisim B'chol Yom. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasafi bina lafin me'od ve'layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Okeach Ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokev kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechid mitzadei kaper. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malvi sharumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten le'ayef koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavir shena meinai utnuma me'afapai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani b'tzelem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael v'tifarah. Please be seated. We're now reading together on the top of page 204, first in Hebrew and then in English at the bottom of the page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Adonai our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of all your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah l'amo Yisrael. Page 206. Elu devarim she'ein lahem shiur, she'adam ochel pirotehem ba'olam hazeh, v'akeren kayemet lo le'olam haba, ve'elu hen kibud avaim u'gmilut chasadim, ve'hashkamahat beit hamidrash shacharit ve'aravit, ve'hachnasat orchim u'bikur cholim, V'achnasat chalav v'yatamit v'yud tefillah v'havat shalom ben adam la'chavero v'talmud Torah keneged kulam. To rise again in body or spirit as we turn to page 212 for the opening blessing of Bezuki Desu. Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam Baruch hu Baruch oseh bereshit Baruch omer v'yosef Baruch ozer u'mekayem Baruch merachem al haaretz Baruch merachem al habriot Baruch meshalem sachar tov l'rehav Baruch Adad v'kayam lanetzach Baruch Bodeh u'matzil Baruch Shemo Bishmachot u'bizmirot negadelcha U'nshabech v'nafayercha v'naskir shimcha v'namlichecha Malkeinu Eloheinu Yachidchei olamim Melech meshubach v'mofar aliyat shemo hagadol Baruch atah Adonai Melech mehulal batishvacho. Okay, please be seated. We're on page 214. Tov le'odon Adonai. Tov le'odon Adonai. Ulezamer le'shimcha elyon. Tov le'odon Adonai. Lehagi baboker chasdecha. Lehagi baboker chasdecha. Ve'emunatcha ba'leilot, ve'emunatcha ba'leilot. Tov le'odon אסור ולנבל להיגיון בכינור. כי שימחתני אדוני בפועלך, למעשה ידיך רנן. מה גדלו מעשיך ים, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. מה גדלו מעשיך ים, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. מה גדלו מעשיך ים, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יהללוך, עוד יהללוך. אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יהללוך, עוד יהללוך. Selah. Do you silently Ashray? ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם. הללויה, 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 hallelujah, hallelujah. Now on page 218, hallelujah, very top of the page. Hallelujah, 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 el bekodsho, hallelujah, bekiyazo, hallelujah, bikurotav, hallelujah, kerokulo, hallelujah, 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 beteka shofar, hallelujah, benevel bechinor, hallelujah, betofu machol, hallelujah, bevinim behugah. Hallelujah, 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 betzil tzlei shama, hallelujah, betzil tzlei trua, kol hanshamat, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Nishmat kol echai tevarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu. Continue silently to the bottom of the page. We're now on page 220. Ilufinu malehe shira hakayam ulshoneinu rina kamod galam vesiftotenu shevach gemarchevei rakiyam vehinenu mehirot kashemesh v'chayareach ve'yadeinu frusot kenishrei shamayim ve'ragleinu kalot ka'ayalot ein anachnu maspikim lehodot lecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu. Continue silently. We're now on page 222 in the middle of the page. Shochen ha'ad mekadosh shemo v'chatu v'hanenu tzadikim Adonai la'yesharim la'avat tehilah v'fi yesharim tihitalalu divrei tzadikim titbarach u'bilshon ha'chasidim titromamu b'kerev kedoshim titkadash u'v'kehalot rivevotam chabei Yisrael berinahait ba'am Shimcha malkeinu bechol dor v'hador yababai yababai bye 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 yababai yababai bye bye yai bye bye yai bye yababai bye 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 Ay babai, ay bye. We'll rise now in body or spirit for the concluding blessing of Pesukei Zimra on page 223. Remain standing through the Chatzi Kaddish and the Baruch Hu on the next pages. Yishtabach shimecha alad malkeinu ahel ha'melech hagadol v'hakadosh b'shamayim u'ba'aretz Ki lecha na'eh Adonai Eloheinu v'Eloi avotenu v'imotenu Shiru shmacha la b'zimra u'zu memshala ha'netzach Gedula u'kura tila v'tiferet kedusha u'malchut Brachot ve'hodahot me'ata v'ad olam Baruch atah Adonai el melech gadol v'tishbachot el ha'hodahot ad haniflaot Avoche b'shirei zimra melech el ha'olamim Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba Ve'al nadi brachurtei ve'amlich malchutei V'chayechonu yemechon v'chayhei d'kol beit Yisrael Ba'agala u'bizman kariv yimeru Amen Yeshmei rabba mevarach Le'alav le'almei almayah Yiparach v'yishtamach v'yitvar v'yitramah v'yitaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudshah Le'elaha min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damirhan ve'alma v'imeru Amen Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam v'amen. Please be seated. We're now on page 228. We'll begin by reading together in English at the bottom of the page, and then Or Chadash in the 3 lines just above it. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of light and darkness, who makes peace and fashions all things. In mercy you illumine the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai, in wisdom you form them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai, our God, for the excellent work of your hands, and for the lights you created, may they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we all may swiftly merit its radiance. Praised are you, Adonai, creator of all heavenly lights. Or Chadash al Zion Ta'ir. Or Chadash al Zion Ta'ir. V'nizkechu lanu me'galei oro. V'nizkechu lanu me'galei oro. Yadadai dai bim bim bam, yadadai dai bim bam, yadadai dai bim bim bam, yadadai dai dai. Yadadai dai bim bim bam, yadadai dai bim bam, yadadai dai bim bim bam, yadadai dai dai. Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMe'orot. Now on page 230, we'll begin by reading in English at the top and then the Hebrew at the bottom. How deeply you have loved us, Adonai our God, gracing us with surpassing compassion. On account of our forebears, whose trust led you to teach them the laws of life, be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, have mercy on us by making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach, and lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is in your Torah. V'ha'areinu b'toratecha v'dahamech libeinu b'mitzvotecha v'yachel le'elaveinu le'ahava u'lirah et shemecha v'lo nimosh v'lo nikalem v'lo nikashel Le'olam va'ed ki b'shem kodechecha hagadol b'amur habatachnu nagila v'nismecha v'yeshuatecha Abienu leshalom, me'ahar makanfot haaretz, ve'tolichenu kol lemiyut, le'artzeinu. Ki el poel yeshuot ata ubanu b'charta, ve'kiraftanu leshimcha, agadol sela b'emet. Leodot lecha lechecha b'yahava, Baruch atah Adonai, abocher b'amo Yisrael b'yahava. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ושוכבך וקומך וקשרתם להיות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. On page 236. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם ונתנו על ציצית הכנף פתיל תכלת v'haya lachem letzitzim v'ritem oto uzkartem ekol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam v'lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem למען תזכרו עשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Okay, we're going to turn now to page 238, beginning with the Hebrew 4 lines up from the bottom. Tehilot le'elyon baruch hu mevorach Moshe u'Miriam u'bnei Yisrael lechanu shir ha'besimcha rabba ve'amru chulam micha hamocha Bailim Adonai Mikamocha Ne'ar HaKodesh Norah Tehilot Osech Belem Ayla Shira Chadasha Shifu Gevulim Leshimcha Sfatayam יחכו למודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד צור ישראל ומה בעזרת ישראל ופדחנו מכה יהודה וישראל גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. We'll begin the Amidah together on page 242 and then continue silently. Please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, you may be seated. Adonai, Sefatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagi Tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. you're still finishing your personal Amidah, please continue at your own pace. You can always catch up to us. For those that are finished, we'll either remain standing or rise again as we turn to page 324 for the repetition of the Amidah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotzeinu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol, HaGibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Koneh HaKol, V'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני וחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם מכלכל חיים בחסד מחיי מתים לרחמים רבים, צומח נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו, לשני עפר, מחנוך בגבורות, ומידו מלך ממית ומחייב, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני לחיי המתים. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמרו, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך כל הארץ כבודו אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ ברוך כבוד אדוני במקומו אחד הוא אלוהינו הוא אבינו מלכנו ומושיענו והוא ישמיענו ורחמיו לעיני כל חי אני אדוני אלוהיכם ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור Alleluia. Ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador, nagid God lecha. Ledor vador, ledor vador, ledor vador, nagid God lecha. ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש קדושתך נקדיש ושבחך אלוהינו והפינו לא יבוש לעולם לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. Okay, please be seated. Now on top of page 329. Ismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Ismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. מקדשי שבי שבת, כולם ישמעו ויתענגו מטובך שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת, קורא עונג שבת, והשביעי רצית בו וקידשתו שבת, תמנעתי ימים Otoker hata Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha. Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat Vekore Oneg Shabbat. Zecher Lemase Bereshit Shabbat. Zecher Lemase Bereshit Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha. Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat, Vekorei Oneg Shabbat. Eloheinu, Eloi Avotenu v'Imotenu, Ritzei, Ritzei, Bimnuchateinu. Kadeshenu b'mitzvotecha, v'ten chelkeinu b'toratecha. Sahabeinu b'itubecha, v'samecheinu b'shuatecha, v'taher libeinu le'ovdecha be'emet, v'hanchileinu Adonai Eloheinu, Elai, 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 Ya la 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 la, ya 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 la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Be'ava ratzon Shabbat kodshecha, v'nuchuva Yisrael, mekadshei shemecha, Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh ha-Shabbat. We'll turn now to page 330. We'll read together in English. On this Shabbat day, as you graciously receive our prayers, help us to hear your call. Grant us enough health to fulfill our duties and the compassion we need to attend to others. Teach us humility that we may perceive our own faults and grant us the wisdom to be forgiving of others. Give us the courage to be true to our highest selves and the charity to see the best in those around us. Give us patience enough not to become discouraged, hope enough to overcome all fears for the future, and faith enough to know your presence. O source of blessing, look with favor upon us. May our offerings be acceptable to you. Baruch atah Adonai, shotcha levadcha birad nabon. We turn now to page 332. We'll begin reading in English together at the very bottom of the page. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations. Modim anachnu lach. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons. Modim anachnu lach. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements. Modim anachnu lach. For human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression. Modim anachnu lach. For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared. Modim anachnu lach. For all who have labored and suffered for a fair world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom. Modim anachnu lach. For human liberties and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose. Modim anachnu lach. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Baruch atah Adonai, atov shimcha u'lechanai lehodot. We're now on page 334, Sim Shalom. Sim Shalom, tova u'bracha, chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, amecha, Barcheinu yotzreinu kulanu kechad, be'or panecha, ki be'or panecha natata lanu, Adonai Eloheinu. Sim shalom, tova u'bracha, chen machesed v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha, Torah chaim ve'ahavat chesed, ואהבת חסד וצדקה וברכה ברחמים וחיים ושלום. שים שלום, תורה וברכה, נעימה חסד ברחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שים שלום, טובה וברכה, נעימה חסד ברחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך. ברוך אתה אדוני המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום. Let's read together on the top of page 337. Prayer is not purely an act. All things pray, and all things pour forth their souls. The heavens pray, the earth prays, every creature and every living thing. In all life there is longing. Creation is itself but a longing, a kind of prayer to the Almighty. What are the clouds, the rising and the setting of the sun, the soft radiance of the moon and the gentleness of the night? What are the flashes of the human mind and the storms of the human heart? They are all prayers, the wordless outpouring of boundless longing for God. Ose shalom b'roma, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, yase shalom, shalom aleinu. ve'al kol Yisrael, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos. So this morning we're reading from Parshat Vayera, which we're going to read in a moment when we get to the Torah service. If you're following in the Plav Chumash, we're going to read from the beginning of the Parsha, page 123, and in the Women's Commentary on page 87. So again, our Plav Chumash 123, Women's Commentary 87. If you're following another way, you're looking for, again, Breshit, Genesis, and we're looking for chapter 18, verse 1. And as Dr. Lenskowski said as he walked in, this is a pretty packed Parsha, to say the very least. So, we have the parts latter in the Parsha that we tend to focus on the most. And I asked this question last night as a curiosity, but the stories of the later part of this Parsha, when do we normally read them beyond just this Shema? Anybody know? The story of Hagar and Ishmael, the story of the Akedah. When do we read those? Very good. Okay, so we read Hagar and Ishmael on which day?
First day.
Very good. And then we read, therefore, the Akedah on the second day, which of course is so funny. That's why I asked last night, because second day Yontif here for us, there's something of a misunderstanding in this. Reform, and it's a long conversation about why we only do one day of Yontif but there's a misunderstanding. Rosh Hashanah is a 2-day holiday. There is no one day of Yontif for it. It's not an alternate. It's 2 days. So the second day of Yontif is generally not as paid attention to, which is sort of funny because then the story of the Akedah is lesser known by a lot of people who don't come to shul. So this is just my pitch. All right, second day Yontif, mine and Howard's, it's our favorite day of the year usually.
Yeah.
We have a good time, right? It's sort of the diehards. But the reality is that even if you don't come to shul the second day of Yontif, everyone knows the story of the Akedah. Everyone knows the story of the binding of Isaac. And that most people also, by extension, know the story of Hagar and Ishmael. And we'll get into some of those things in Torah study. But we tend to gloss over the beginning of the Parsha, which is also extremely important. And I talked about last night how this is the origin of what becomes a truly important, if not essential mitzvah, the commandment of Hachmasat Orchim, the expectation of welcoming in guests, strangers. So I'm not going to rehash my drash from last night, but it really ends up becoming something really powerfully connected to who we are as Jews. But it's also full of all sorts of other really interesting moments, and one that I want to just test our close Torah reading a little bit to see. So there is a complication that's going to arise in the first 8 verses, And I wanted to see if others will identify it as we go. So I'm just going to read the first 8 verses and let's see what we come up with. Okay? So the Eternal appeared to him, being Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, as he was sitting at the entrance of his tent at about the hottest time of the day. Looking up, he saw, lo, 3 men standing opposite him. Seeing them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them, and bowing down to the ground, he said, "My lords, if I have found favor in your sight," which, by the way, for those that were starting to build our lexicon here in Hebrew, "Matzati chen be'einecha" is a recurring phrase that you will see in various places. And it's sort of it would have been a colloquialism to some degree from that era. But there are times in which this phrase is used in an interaction between, Abraham and God, Moshe and God, but also between people, as you see. And it's, as I said, it's sort of what would probably have been a sort of phrasing. But the main idea is, if it's really to honor me by honoring you, right? To let me be able to welcome you in this way. Okay, so if I found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, then wash your feet, recline under a tree, and let me bring a bit of bread, and you can restore yourselves. And then you can go on. And now that you have come across your servant, and they responded very well, do as you propose. So it's a very interesting way of accepting generosity, right? Do as you propose. But we'll leave that to the side for a second. So Abraham then hurried toward the tent to Sarah and said, "Hurry, need 3 measures of wheat flour and bake some bread cakes." And then Abraham then ran to the herd and took a young calf, tender and sound, gave it to his servant lad, who quickly prepared it. He took sour milk and sweet milk and the calf he had prepared and set it all before them. And as he stood over them under the tree, they ate. Okay. Now, what potential challenge do we see in this text? Something that might challenge our ideas. Look carefully if it doesn't jump out at you. And look, you look like you had maybe a thought.
I think they cook it also.
Okay. So wait, Marsha, you said, right? Okay. So there's a very practical question. Sarah was an excellent chef. What can I tell you? But I think the brother Schwatsky over here, right, had the most of it. Milchik and Fleischik, not together. Okay, as a principal idea, it's something that we immediately should look at and say, well, wait a minute here, right? Abraham, the father of our people, is serving a meal, and what does he do? He takes milk and he puts meat and he puts them together and he gives them to his guests. So first of all, just before I give you some background on this, how would you approach this? How would you think of this and explain this one?
Well, if you had milk first, he's all right.
Okay, very good. Very good. Okay, so this is a lesser known thing unless you grew up in a kosher household. The order matters a great deal. So if you, for example, have a delicious pot roast or brisket, and then you want to have ice cream as a child after Shabbos dinner, you have to wait. In my household, it was 3 hours. So depending on the stringency of your upbringing, it may be as much as 6 hours. I think there may be more. And the logic of it generally, as I understand it, is that, again, not to get too graphic, but right, as things go into our processing within our stomachs and our intestines, etc., right, our digestive process, the concern of the rabbis was, even if you didn't eat the things together, they will meet in there somewhere and they will admix, right? And therefore, to even prevent the possibility of that happening, this is one of what is called a siyag l'Torah, a fence around the Torah. And so the rabbis construct additional layers of kashrut laws just to prevent even the off chance of something happening unintentionally, even within the stomach itself. However, and this is the one part of the Talmud that and maybe later actually that this is discussed, that I'm not quite sure why it doesn't work the same way exactly in reverse, but the reverse is that you can eat, for example, a dairy meal, and then so long as you wash your hands and you brush your teeth and you wash out your mouth, then you can go ahead and you can have meat immediately afterwards. So that circumstance is much less the case. And again, I'm not entirely sure I understand exactly why we get out of the woods on that one. But inevitably, right, the rabbis are establishing kashrut laws as they understand them vis-a-vis the Torah itself. And so, even in that circumstance, like let's say that it was reversed and all of that, then it would have been fine. But there's still something more to this. So what else can we think of? What other ideas sort of percolate? If we were the rabbis, how would we begin to explain all of this? Or if we aren't the rabbis, how would we try to explain? Well, so one thing is actually fairly logical. Okay, the mitzvah of kashrut comes when? When do we start learning about the?
Pretty much later.
Much later, right? Much later. As in, much later towards like revelation of Torah and the giving of commandments and all of those kinds of things. Then, in other words, Abraham basically lived long before there were the established laws that are given at Sinai, and therefore he's not held accountable for behaviors that weren't expected behaviors in that era in which he is interacting with God. So you can imagine, however, that the logical arguments, right? Because that's one that I think most of us, just for taking the religious piece of it out, we would accept that as a logical explanation, right? But again, Abraham is meant to be a sort of paradigmatic figure for us. We look to Abraham as a person to learn from, both good and bad, and what to do and what not to do. And even the suggestion that Abraham was somehow living a life in which he was not fully living up to the commandments, up to the mitzvot, right, even before they technically exist in time, doesn't work so well for the rabbis either. And so as a result, they create numerous midrash that try to, again, explain this and justify it and turn it over, because the last thing that the rabbis want is for anybody to look askance, first of all, at Abraham and Sarah and their practice and their behaviors. And as I said, for us to not then create a sort of side reality for all of our patriarchs and matriarchs, or the people who existed prior to the giving of the Torah, that they are different than us in somehow, right? The continuity gets broken if we start thinking in those kinds of terms. So whether we accept these positions or not is probably less material, but I did want to share one of the midrash that actually comes out of this because it's really quite fascinating. And it involves, believe it or not, Moses and the angels and much further on. So remembering again that the Torah describes these three really anashim, right? Anashim is the word for men, human beings. But the understanding of the tradition is that these were in fact angels, right? Malachim. And not just any angels, actually. The tradition is that each of them is one of the, what is later referred to, I think, in other traditions as archangels, but named angels who had specific responsibilities. So, for example, Raphael, you don't know about, right? So, and our Rapha in the room should understand, right? Raphael is sort of associated, Rapha as a doctor, right, as a healer. So Raphael is the angel that's associated with. And so each of these angels has a different sort of role to play. But in this case, they're still angels. So the rabbis ask the question, right? How is it that the angels could then go about, right? They would be aware of God's commandments, even if Abraham is not. So how is it that the angels of all are going to sit down and eat this meal filled with meat and milk? So again, the same idea, the rabbis try to justify that, protect the angels from their, seemingly bad behavior, and they say, actually, they weren't really eating. It appeared that way to Abraham, but they were basically going along with the process. They don't digest food. They don't intake food the same way. They're angels, so they live in a different kind of world, and they're existing, right? So I see Alan's, eyes are rolling. A lot of times, right, they may not buy this particular thing. But the more...
Abraham didn't know that they were angels. He thought they were people.
Precisely. And so that's another explanation, right? The rabbi say, well, actually, in Abraham's case, he just assumed these were three guys who knew nothing about his God. Remember, at this time, the entire religion of what we would eventually call Judaism is retained within one family, right? So it wouldn't make any sense for Abraham to expect that these people walking down in the desert are part of his group. So he's going to feed them in the way that most people would have been fed at that time, which is a combination of milk and meat. Okay? So I want to just share this one last one, which I think is really fascinating. So in this instance, we get a situation many parshas later on, in which there is an argument when Moses is about to be given the Torah, the angels protest. And this is not it's not the only midrash in which this is the case, but the angels protest. They have a sort of kind of jealous relationship with the creation of human beings from the very, very beginning. And they protest again. They say, to God, you should not give the Torah to these people. Okay, saying that mortal human beings don't deserve God's greatest treasure, the Torah. So in this instance, in this midrash, Moshe is in the room while this is happening, right? That this argument is taking place in front of him. So in Moshe, in typical fashion, he says back to him, and he asks a question of the angels as a result. He says, in your case, right, you're calling us the sinners, the ones who can't be trusted. But I remember hearing this story about how when you appeared with Abraham, and Abraham served you meat and milk, and you ate it. Okay, so you knew the Torah, and it didn't stop you from indulging in this violation of the mitzvot. So how are you going to then tell us, right, that we're not deserving of the Torah also, right? We're all kind of in the same boat. And ultimately, the angels are silenced, and the rest, gives to us. We get the Torah as a result of it. So why do I tell you all this midrash? Why do I go through all this rigmarole? This is not a sermon in the traditional sense where I'm going to give you some major charge to go out with, but more as a realization that when we read the stories of the Torah, when we read about our ancestors, we read about Abraham and Sarah, and as I think I explained a few weeks ago, oftentimes the rabbis of our tradition felt an obligation to protect the character and the status of our greatest leaders, right? To not give an opportunity for people to question their behavior or to consider them as negative paradigms, but really only seen in the positive. And so there's a whole period of time in which you really can't say anything negative about anything, or you can't ask questions and you can't challenge it. But the reality is that the Midrash sort of blows that entire concept open. And there are so many, just in this one instance, right? So many different ways, 5, 6, 7, 8 different Midrash that try to explain the situation in a way that will feel meaningful. And so that really, in essence, I've been thinking a lot lately about, what is it that makes our history unique? What makes our people unique? How have we survived or perpetuated and gotten to this point in time when there are so many reasons why that should not have played out? One of the reasons I feel increasingly is because of things like Midrash, right? Things that allow us to not be held really captive by a particular dogma or a harsh dogma, one that does not allow for variation, for disagreement, for debate. And we see actually in the Midrash, it's so funny, right? But so much humanity. And even the angels are given a certain sense of humanity, right? It's part of the way that I think the earliest rabbis really, in a much healthier way, try to help us to see the Torah as a complex, living part of our souls, our collective souls. And when we run into a situation like this where something seems off, rather than either getting upset about it or trying to rationalize it post facto to make sense for us, instead that we engage with it and that we try through things like Midrash to create a different way of seeing the text and understanding, right? In this case, if we're going to take away just this one Midrash, what does it tell us? The angels are to be held in a high esteem without a doubt. But they too, as we learn on Yom Kippur, are not blameless, right? That image of the fact that we sometimes humble ourselves a little too much. We have to understand that we all, including the angels, are trying to chase a particular reality. We're trying to chase an emulation of God, which inevitably means that we will succeed in some ways and we will fail in others, and we will adjust ourselves accordingly. And so I want us to really treasure these ideas, treasure Midrash. Don't find it impossible to engage with. Don't feel like we have to accept every version. But to see that basically when we engage in Torah study, when we're sitting here doing this, right, that is a continuation of exactly this procedure and this process. And it is one of the life-giving elements of what it means to be part of the Jewish people throughout time. And so I just, again, when you have time, go look up and, Phil, go ahead.
Actually, it starts out here, God appears to Abraham.
Right.
So what was God doing appearing to Abraham? It's a Krishna Bikur Cholim, because we just read that
Right.
for 9 years he was circumcised.
Exactly.
And God appears to him, said Krishna Bikur Cholim,
Correct.
which was one of the major mitzvot.
Correct.
Then we follow Achnasat Orchim
Right.
after this. The two major things are mentioned pretty early on.
Absolutely.
And the second thing that strikes one is when you're entertaining people, people start getting busy to make a banquet. There are two stages here to the entertainment. One is, just give me a piece of bread and washing your feet, your hands, and that's enough too. Then you can have a banquet. So
Absolutely.
there's no excuses not to have we haven't got food, you've got bread and water, that's good enough to have
Absolutely.
So, and then the last thing is when you're mixing meat and milk, it says by you paying the flame. It was just
put there. Exactly.
They never mixed it.
Right.
And they could take the milk first. They could have a choice, just add milk or meat.
Correct.
Because they weren't mixed together.
Correct.
That was a banquet.
Correct.
So it's like
a smorgasbord, as they say.
Like a smorgasbord.
Yeah.
You take what you want.
Yeah.
You didn't have to eat all of it.
If you're going to
you could be flashy corners.
I think these days that's very right. It's very common. A lot of these weddings you go and they have there's the Chinese station and the Italian station and the pizza station, all these things, right? Sushi, right? I love that. No, but you're absolutely correct. And actually, anybody who's experienced, hospitality, for example, either in the Islamic world or the Bedouin, right? This is very much. Some of these procedures are still very, very much common. And even in a modern thing, right? You go to Israel, right? There still oftentimes is a procedure, as Philip said. right? And it's maybe not nobody's washing anybody's feet in this day and age generally, but but there is something certainly of that. And actually, when I spoke last night, I think I accidentally may have thrown out the piece of paper. But there, the rabbis basically talk about actually how preeminent Achmasat Orfim is, and as you said, Bikur Cholim, right? Because we can imagine, being at an older age and having a circumcision is something that definitely requires some, recovery time. So when God is visiting, that is indeed the tradition, right? That's the idea of why, because it is very unusual, right? Normally, the circumstance, it doesn't describe God appearing unless there is something really essential that needs to sort of happen.
See, he left God actually,
right?
And he went to greet the guests,
right?
So it shows you how important.
Well, and that was exactly it, right?
Is in the order of things.
Exactly, and that's what the section of Talmud was talking about last time. I'm forgetting. I think it's from Shabbat, but it may be from. There was also a piece from Chagiga, but basically it was saying exactly that, right? That welcoming guests is actually more important even than welcoming the presence of God, and that is drawn from exactly this idea, right? That he goes and runs off to take care of the people, and but again, it's just such an amazing thing that in this 8 verses you can pull out so many different things, so many different elements to it. It's a beautiful layer cake.
Don't miss the banquet in the small.
Yes, well, that is for sure. It's fun. As a last aside, I remember before I was going to be ordained, I was talking to a rabbi who had been a rabbi for many, many years, and he was a rabbi in Los Angeles. And he told me at a certain point in his career, on average, on a regular Shabbat, he would have, usually 2 b'nai mitzvah in the morning, like an afternoon bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah. Then he would have a wedding in the evening. And by the end of it, he would go to each one of them and he'd eat at each one of them, and he put on 40 pounds just because he kept going to all. So he had to actually stop going to the smorgasbord precisely because, so there is such a thing as actually overwhelming hospitality, which, sort of like anybody with a bubby who was lucky enough to have a bubby like mine, that's, exactly, right? You look skinny. I'm like, looking at me, and she's saying, you look skinny. I mean, really, anyway. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Again, a lot of this stuff, if you come on for the Torah study, we'll get into a little bit deeper. But we're going to begin our Torah service on page 362 in our prayer books. Okay, and Howard, I don't know, you want to give the Aliyah too, and again, just before I do, page numbers 123 in the Plout, 87 in the Women's Torah Count. Okay. Ein kamocha Elohim Adonai v'ein gemasecha malchutcha malchut kol olamim u'memshaltecha bechol dor v'hador Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed Adonai oz le'lo yiten Adonai evarech et amo v'shalom Abba harachamim eitiva v'tzorcha et Zion tivnei chomot Yerushalayim ki becha levad patachnu Melech el Ram Benisa Adon Olamim Ki mitzion tetzei Torah Ki mitzion tetzei Torah Ulevar Adonai miYerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah L'amo Yisrael B'kdushato Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai
Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo
Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo
והנצח וההוד כיכו בשמיים ובארץ כיכו בשמיים ובארץ לך אדוני המלאכה ועמית נעשה לכל ראש רוממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו להר קודשו רוממו אדוני אלוהינו וישתחוו להר קודשו. Okay, please be seated. All right, somebody want to do our Aliyah this morning? Anybody? Lanskowskis, would you like to do our Aliyah? We've just been doing, we want Aliyah, and you can do the bracha from where you are. You don't have to, okay, good. Okay. So right here.
Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
If you want to, you can go sit back around and then come up for the end. All right. Well, just want to make sure folks got time to get back because these are. I need my gabaim in the crowd, so you can call out if I'm wrong on anything. You know, it's very important. I all the years of having Howard right next to me. You know, I'm still getting used to it. I'm doing my best, but it's not so easy. Amen. Vayirah lahav Adonai belonei mamrei, vehu yoshev petach ha'ohel kechom hayom. Vayisai nahav vayar, vehinei shlosha anashim nitzavim alav vayar vayarot likratam mipetach ha'ohel vayishtachu artzam vayomer Adonai im na matzati chen be'enecha al na ta'avur me'al avdecha ויקח נא מעט מים ורחצו רגליכם והישנעו תחת העץ ואקרא פתח לחם וסדו ליבכם אחר תעברו כי על כן עברתם על עבדכם, ויאמרו כן תעשה כאשר דיברתם, וימהר אברהם האוהלה אל שרה, ויאמר מהרי 3 זעים קמח סולת לושי ועשי עוגות ואל הבקר רץ אברהם ויקח בן בקר רך וטוב ויתן אל הנער וימהר לעשות אותו ויקח חמאה וחלב, ובין הבקר אשר עשה, ויתן לפניהם, והוא עומד עליהם, תחת העץ יאכלו, ויאמרו אליו, איה שרה אשתך, ויאמר הנה באוהל, ויאמר שוב ושוב אליך כעת חיה, והנה בן לשרה אשתך, בשרה שומעת, פתח האוהל והוא אחריו, ואברהם ושרה זקנים באים בימים, חדל להיות לשרה אורח כנשים, ותצחק שרה בקרבה לאמור אחרי ולותי הייתה לי עדנה ואדוני זקן, ויאמר אדוני אל אברהם, למה זה צחקה שרה לאמור, האף אומנם אלד ואני זקנתי, היפלא מאדוני דבר, למועד אשוב אליך כעת חיה ולשרה בן. And I'm realizing that we never actually called you up officially anyway, so this is a good excuse. Yamod Shrega Feivel Ben Abraham Lealia Harishona. Okay, go ahead. You want to come back up again, Philip, or you want to do from there? Okay, בסדר. Amen. Yeshua. Okay. Okay, before we lift and dress the Torah, we'll take a moment to offer our Mishaberach this morning. We're on page 371 in our Sidurim. Mishaberach Avotenu v'Imotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Hu Yivarech et HaCholim Ha'elu. We'll begin this morning thinking of Glenn Tinney, Tzipora Ahava, Gittel Bat Shmuel ve'Aviva, Gerald Hirsch, Oren Nachum, Bruce Steak, Hannah Ruth Bat Sarah, Jeff Baker, David Tasher, Jim Cohn, Monique Banks Rathman, Lindsay Epstein, Dolores Michka, Sylvia Orn, Yerachmiel Ben Hinda, Paloma Chauhan, Samuel Moskowitz, Chaim Leib, Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollock, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Eminah Chavas, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Roz Brody, Chana Ruth Bat Sarah, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva Bat Sarah, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idol Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Ben Chaim, Rivka Bat Devorah, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kossoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klotman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, Leah Bat Naomi, Gedalia Ben Leah, Justin Banner, Tzipora Ahava Bat Yehudit Rachel, Jane Beard Cass, Amy Cass, Steve Levine, and Ira Madras. And certainly welcome those at home. If you're thinking of loved ones, to mention those names aloud now. And for those that are in the room, we'll start on this side and work over here. So, Marcia, you want to start?
Sure, Adrian Berger, Kevin Major, John, Jim Cass, Don Stapleton, Albert Stapleton, Phil Conisky, Rena, Mary Moore, Linda Reiser, Balsta, Loretta, Jody, Ed King.
Michael Vanessa, Asher Yaakov Yachai, Azal Bat Adel, Arav Yeshayahu Valia Ben Nechanu Shlomo, Arav Avigdor Moshe Ben Tzvima, Chazan Zminavat Kut, Arav Moshe Prager, Jerry Levy, Teddy Swift, Eva Steve Brown, Robert Brooks, Harvey Cohn, Aaron Lieber. Chana Rivka Bat Yehuda Gil, Marsha,
Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Alehem Hachalimam U'Leraputam L'Chazikam V'Yishlach Lehem Mehera Refuah Refuah Shlema Min Hashamayim Refuat HaNefesh Refuat HaGuf Hashta B'Agalav Zman Karev V'Namar Amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal those who are suffering. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit, and let us say together, Amen. El na refana la, el na refana la, el na refana la, refuah shelema. El na refana lo, el na refana lo, el na refana lo, refuah shelema. Okay, we'll now rise in body or spirit as we lift and dress the Torah on page 370. Vezot HaTorah Moshe B'nei Bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai v'yad Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Okay, please be seated. So this morning's Haftarah can be found on page 149 if you have a Plav Chumash handy. Otherwise, you're looking for the 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 to 37. And the main connecting piece here, this is a very famous section of Kings, but a very famous section in general, story of Elisha, the prophet Elisha, and you'll see very quickly that the connecting piece between our Parsha this week and this is really about, again, a circumstance in which a woman who is barren, who's had no children, suddenly is able to have their son. Again, also, I think in both cases with an older husband, as they say, right? An Ish Zaken. And after being given basically a divine kind of proclamation. But obviously it's a different story, but you'll see how the connecting piece comes in here. And remembering that Elisha is the student basically of Elijah, so considered to be one of our great prophets. So again, we'll begin that reading in a moment. First we'll do our blessings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nbiim tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abocher b'torah u'Moshe avdo u'Yisrael amo u'b'nbiei ha'emet v'hatzedek. The wife of one of the prophetic disciples cried out to Elisha, saying, "Your servant, my husband, has died. I know how your servant always revered the Eternal. And now a creditor is coming to take away my 2 sons to be his slaves." Elisha said to her, "What can I do for you? Tell me what you have in the house." She replied, "Your maidservant has nothing at home but a small oil jar." "Go outside to your neighbors," said Elisha, "and borrow as many empty jars as you can. Then you and your sons shut yourselves in and pour oil into all these jars. When one is full, set it aside." She went away and did this, shutting herself and her sons in. They kept bringing jars, and she kept pouring. When these jars were full, she said to one of her sons, "Bring me another jar." But he answered, "There aren't any more." And the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, who said, Go sell the oil and pay your debt. You and the children can live on what remains. One day Elisha went to Shunem. A rich woman who lived there prevailed on him to have a meal. And from then on, he would stop for a meal whenever he was passing through. The woman said to her husband, I am sure that this man who comes here so often is a holy man of God. Let's build a small room on the roof, put a bed, a table, a chair, a lamp in it, and he can stay there whenever he visits us. One day he came there and went to the upper room to rest. He told his servant Gehazi to call the Shunammite woman. He called to her, and she presented herself before Elisha, who said to Gehazi, ask her what we can do for her in return, for all the trouble she has taken on our account. Can I speak on your behalf with the king or the army commander? I live among my kin, she replied. What can we do for her then? Said Elisha to Gehazi, who answered, well, she has no son, and her husband is an old man. Call her back, he said. He called to her, and she stood at the door. And when she had returned, Elisha said, at this time next year, you will be holding a son in your arms. She said, my lord, you are a man of God, but do not delude your maidservant. But as Elisha had promised her, the woman gave birth to a son at that season the next year. The boy grew up, and one day he went out to see his father, who was among the reapers. Suddenly he cried out to his father, my head, my head. He said to a servant, carry him to his mother. The servant took the boy to his mother, who held him on her lap until noon when he died. She took him up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, Elisha, and left, closing the door behind her. And then she called to her husband, send me one of the servants and a donkey. I must hurry to the man of God and come back. Why go to him today, he asked. It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. Don't worry about it, she answered. She saddled the donkey and said to her servant, drive the donkey and get going, and don't slow down unless I tell you to. She went to Mount Carmel and found the man of God. Seeing her while she was still some distance away, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, there is the Shunammite woman. Run to her and ask her whether she, her husband, and the son are all well. She told them they were well, but when she reached the man of God on the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi was about to push her away, but the man of God said, let her be. Her heart is bitter, and the Eternal kept it from me. She said, did I ask for a son from my Lord? Did I not say, don't deceive me? He said to Gehazi, hurry up, take my staff and go. Do not stop to greet anyone. Do not reply to anyone's greeting. Go and put my staff on the boy's face. And the boy's mother said, as the Eternal lives, and as you live, I will not leave you. So he got up and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead of them, laid the staff on the boy's face, and there was no sound and no sign of life. He turned back to meet Elisha and told him, the boy is not awakened. Elisha went into the house, and there was the dead boy lying on his bed. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Eternal. Then he stretched himself over the boy, placing his mouth, eyes, and hands on the boy's mouth, hands, and eyes. He crouched over him, and the boy's body grew warm. Elisha got up, walked to and fro about the house, and again crouched over the boy. The boy then sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha called Gehazi and told him to call the Shunammite woman. When she came back, he said, lift up your son. She threw herself down at his feet and bowed low to the ground. Then she lifted up her son and left. How many of you the first time that you're hearing that story? Just out of curiosity. First
I
time?
remember it.
Yeah, well, we could talk about it more, but it's really a beautiful ending, certainly.
That's what I want.
Well, so this is a reason why, again, it's hard to read only excerpts of the prophets, right? It's worth reading the entirities of. That's why I keep thinking that I don't have enough classes. I think we need more classes with more things to go through. But in any case, blessing afterwards, page 372. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol hadorot, ahel haneman haomer v'yoseh, המדבר ומקיים שכל דבריו אמת וצדק על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הלווים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לכבוד ולתפארת על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. We'll rise in body or spirit as we offer a prayer for our country on the bottom of page 376. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. May we never be lazy in the work of peace, and may we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us all to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen. We're on page 377, a prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu Shabashamayim, Tzur Yisrael, V'goalo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reishit Smichat Gulateinu. Hagen aleha be'evrat chastecha, ufros aleha sukat shlomecha. Ushlach orcha ba'amitcha l'rasheha, sareha ve'yotzeha. V'taknem be'etzah tova milfanecha, v'natata shalom ba'aretz, v'simchat olam le'yoshveha, v'nomar. Amen. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love, spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. Amen. Remain standing as we turn back to page 374. Yeah, hallelujah, Shem Adonai, ki niskav Shemo levado, Odo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren li'avo, tehila lecho chasida, livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Ki lekach tov natati lachem torati al kazovu et chaim hi lamachazikim ba v'tomecheha meushar teracheha darchein ha'am v'chol netiboteha shalom hashivenu Adonai elecha ben hashuva kadesh kadesh yameinu kadesh yameinu Remain standing as we turn to page 586, Aleinu L'Shabeach at the bottom of the page. Aleinu L'Shabeach Adon HaKol, Latet V'duha Le'yotzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu K'goyei Ha'aratzot, V'lo Samanu K'mishpachot Ha'adama, Shelo Samachem K'dukahem, V'gor aleinu kechol ha'onam, v'anachnu kor'im, u'mishtachalim u'modim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu, v'nehemar v'haya Adonai, lemelech al kol ha'aretz, Vayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. Let's close the morning. Those observing yahrzeit, do please remain standing. Everyone else may be seated. We think first of those who've passed in our community in recent months. Sylvia Alderman, Morris Dickstein, Fred Eber, Sandra Furman, Evelyn Geld, Arthur Grossman, Elaine Grossman, Jeanette Kopp, William Lippman, Audrey Lubo, Morty Lynn, Jerry Monroe, Harry Olstein, Danielle Lisa Rigg, Geraldine Rosen, Harriet Roth, Jeannie Rubin, Howard Schreier, Dorothy Shupnick, Paul Silver, Marlise Silverberg, Blanche Sklar, Rita Sandra Snyder, Joan Strong Tangzilius, Virginia Tizer, and Ann Weiss. We also mark the yahrzeit that occurred during the last week for Gail Abel, Sura Appel, Robert Benjamin, Abe Bennett, Louis Berkowitz, Samuel Blake, Alain de Rothschild, David Doctorow, Beatrice Dror, Richard Agosi, Morris Eisner, Aileen Fagan, Teresa Gilbert, Irving Gostin, Meyer Hinderstein, Claire Klausner, Shelley Levine, Stuart Newmark, Monique Paskowski, Stephen Jackson Popkin, Samuel Rodney, Abraham Saltzman, Morton Schoenbach, Judy Sheldon, Barry Tabachnik, Harry Wertor, and Rose Weiss. Is anyone saying Kaddish for anyone that we didn't mention? If you're watching at home and you do have somebody that you're remembering, please acknowledge them now. And we'll rise in body or spirit as we offer the Mourner's Kaddish on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayichon u'b'yomechon u'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael. Agala v'zman kariv v'yivru. Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah v'barach le'alam le'almei amayim. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata v'amiran be'alma v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shalom araba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be fervent. Okay, please be seated. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Some important first announcements. Please join us for Torah study beginning at 12 o'clock on Zoom. Also a reminder that tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, we have a Zoom book talk with Bina Bernard on our most recent book, Keeping Secrets. Roger Rosenblatt praised the book with his review, saying, Bina Bernard has written a beautifully paced, heartfelt, and powerful novel of destruction and repair, the eternal story of survival. And so please sign up for this free event through our website, and you'll get the Zoom link again 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. Coming up this week, Niddah Mitzvah will meet at 11:30 on Monday, Hebrew School at 3:30, and the Social Justice Committee at 5 o'clock that evening. That will be on Zoom. My class on Abraham Joshua Heschel and his book on the prophets is Wednesdays at noon. Hebrew School also meets later that day at 3:30. My class on Friday mornings now beginning at 9:15 instead of 9, a journey to the heart of the Siddur. And again, a reminder, anybody, even if you can't make it, if you'd like to sign up, you can get a video of it and watch it at your leisure. Also, it's pretty crazy to imagine it, but November is coming. And this year, Hanukkah is very early. So just to put that on everybody's awareness, and we're not going to be able to do a big party like we've done in the years past, but we got permission, or we're getting permission to have more access on the wharf so that we can do hopefully some more outdoor stuff and make it a little more substantial for the first night. And but we got a lot of things coming up in November in general, so please keep an eye out for the calendar when it comes in next week. Otherwise, just keep up with the e-blast and all those good things. If you have any other announcements, anything I missed? No? Okay. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching at home. Okay, any requests for closing this morning? Anything? Anybody? Marsha's always in Kelohenu. El Kelohenu is a very good one. If I was better at the Ladino one, we could do that one. But I tried that once when Penny was here, and it just didn't work so well. My Spanish was never great, so my Ladino was worse. All right. All right. One of these weeks, I'm going to remind myself the Anim Zmiro, because it's one of my favorite melodies, but it's been a long time since I've done it. So we're not going to do that today. Let's do Ein Adir, 6:32. Mi piel, yevarach kol Yisrael. Mi piel, yevarach kol Yisrael. Ein Adir k'Adonai ve'hin baruch. Keven Amram ein Gedol ha'Torah ve'hin Mashiach Yisrael. Mi piel, yevarach kol Yisrael. Mi piel, yevarach kol Yisrael. Ein hadur k'Adonai ve'hin bati. Keven Amram ein Zakah ha'Torah ve'hin Chachamech Yisrael. Mi piel, yevarach kol Yisrael. Mi piel, yevarach kol Yisrael. Ein tahor k'Adonai ve'ein yachid. Keven Amram ein kabir ha'Torah ve'ein lamdenech Yisrael. Mipiel, Yevarach Kol Yisrael, Mipiel, Yevarach Kol Yisrael, Ein Podech Adonai, Ve'en Tzadik, Keven Avram, Ein Kedosha, Katorah, Ve'en Tomchech Yisrael, Mipiel, Yevarach Kol Yisrael, Mipiel, Yevarach Kol Yisrael. We'll rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 604. Shamer at the very top of the page. Veshameru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat lahatzot et HaShabbat ledorotam berit olam beini ubein b'nei Yisrael oti leolam Veshameru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat La'asot et HaShabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim et haaretz veshamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat la'asot et HaShabbat ledorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashvi Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat vaynafash, veshamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, la'asot et HaShabbat, ledorotam berit olam. Al ken berach Adonai yom HaShabbat vayikadshehu sabri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim, Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Shabbat Shalom to the camera. See you at Torah study.
Oh, back to the